Strategies to Support a Diverse Workforce webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Susanna Chance. Before we get started, we want to go through a few housekeeping items. We hope that you'll visit our website. We have a lot of great information about the different services that we provide. That website address is spectrum.consulting, not spectrum.com, but spectrum.consulting. One of the great things that's on the web page is our Insights page, and on that page we have several different blogs that are on there. Our popular Ask Fran blog, we have Steve on leadership, and we have a lot of labor law alerts and important information for employers to have access to. Today's facilitators are Steve Wood and myself, Susanna Chance. Steve is the President and CEO of Work Opportunities Unlimited. Steve and I have both been with the organization for 19 years. He beats me by a couple of months. Steve has a lot of experience. He started his career in banking. He had his own business where he did strategic planning consulting. He consulted for us and then came to work for us. Steve has been an adjunct faculty member at Southern New Hampshire University and has volunteers in a lot of different opportunities, or volunteers in a lot of organizations, and provides a wide range of services to our customers. I'm Susanna. I've been here for 19 years. I oversee the Human Resource Department for our organization, which is about 950 employees in 7 states, and also provide consulting services to a wide variety of clients. So we welcome you here today. During today's session, we'll have your phones muted, but you can communicate with us during the session. If you look at the GoToWebinar panel that's usually on the right-hand side of your screen, if it's expanded, you'll see near the bottom, you can type in questions during the session. I'll be monitoring those questions, and if appropriate, I'll jump in with them as we go on, and if we have time at the end of the session, we'll go ahead and answer questions then as well. If the GoTo panel looks very small, go ahead and click on that orange box with the arrow in it, and that should expand it, and you can see that chat feature. This webinar has been approved for 1 credit hour for the Human Resource Certification Institute PHR General Credits. You need to be with us for the full session today to be able to get those credits, and we'll give you the number there at the end of the session. We are recording today's session as well. The recording of the webinar should be available. It's generally up on our website, spectrum.consulting, within 24 hours, and we encourage you, if you enjoy the session today and learn from it, to share that link with others. They're welcome to watch it at any time on demand. And if you miss all of today's session and you want those credit hours, you can go ahead and go online, watch the session, and you'll get the certification number as well. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve Wood, who's going to start with our learning objectives.
Thank you, Susanna, and good morning, everyone. Today is an interesting topic for all of us. I'm sure each of you has your own diversity in the workplace that you're learning about. And so we have 5 objectives today that we're hoping to achieve. The first is that we're going to confirm really what is a diverse workforce, what does it mean, what does the term mean. We're going to talk about the benefits of having a diverse workforce. We're going to review the 5 elements found in work cultures that welcome diversity and how you can develop those 5 elements. We're going to talk about some strategies to manage those 5 elements, and that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And then we're going to finish with some actions you can take now to expand your diversity in the workplace. So let's first take a look at, what is a diverse workforce? And if we asked you to define diversity, each of you would probably give us a different definition, probably a diverse definition, actually. So let's see if we can establish some kind of baseline. I think the key is to recognize that each individual is unique and respectfully recognize and treat each person with dignity. And if we look at each person, one person at a time, it becomes a lot easier to just fold everyone into your workplace. As you know, the equal Equal Employment Opportunity Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act actually refers to fairness, equal treatment of all peoples that are in protected classes, and these laws protect them, and they were passed in the past couple of decades to make sure that companies recognize that. Protected classes, include such things as age and race and gender, national origin, things like that. Americans with Disabilities tries to enable businesses and make workplaces a little easier for people with disabilities to work and be accepted and wonderful team members. And the ADA, I think, has done a pretty good job with that. It was first passed with less enforcement teeth and proposed by the first President Bush. And I think in many cases we've found that it works very well. Employers are very open to it. Now, but let's focus, diverse workforces really do focus on what the similarities and differences are between individuals. Sometimes when you use the word diverse workforce, you might think cultural diversity. You might think welcoming people of different abilities into the workforce. And so here's sort of three categories that we've put together to look at diversity. First is cultural. That would be ethnicity and nationality and religious backgrounds, all those, of course, protected by the EEO. Another category is demographic. Could be age, gender, family status. Those are all demographic factors. We're going to touch on a few of those in our presentation today. And then the third, which actually is probably the most significant that people don't often think about in a diverse workforce, is that we have people with different abilities. That would be you and me. Suzanne and I each have different abilities. Personality traits, frankly, and some of the work that we do, personality traits cause some of the bigger conflicts, more so than ethnicity and demographics. So personality traits is another factor that affects the workforce. Learning styles and how you train and teach people, those are all individual abilities that people have or differences that people have. So it's important to remember that we add those into the diverse workforce. Now, North Carolina State University has an interesting definition which I think might capture the definition of a diverse workforce. It's one, a commitment to recognizing and appreciating the variety of characteristics that make individuals unique in an atmosphere that promotes and celebrates individual and collective achievement. Interesting, those last bolded words, promotes and celebrates individual and collective achievement. I think it's a nice statement that does capture a lot of what a diverse workforce is all about. So now let's take a look, Susanna, at what some of the benefits of a diverse workforce are.
Sure. I think some organizations start thinking about diversity because they do have a legal obligation to ensure that they have a diverse workforce, whether it's the contracts that they have or laws that they need to comply with. But what they often find is that there are some benefits that maybe they anticipated or some that they didn't anticipate from having that diverse workforce. Certainly there's evidence for performance increasing through increasing the effects of diversity because it can improve creativity and innovation through the team members' greater variety of perspectives. And Steve and I were just in a meeting recently where we brought in someone in a different position where we found that person's perspective was so helpful to have in the meeting because it just prompted us to think about things differently and to maybe approach a situation in a way that we never would have thought of ourselves. So having different points of view, different styles, different values can really provide that innovation and creativity. I think for companies it can help as well thinking about how products or services might be used by people who have different frames of reference than we do, that we may not even be thinking that way. So innovation and creativity can be a really big benefit of a diverse workforce. And if the organization is performing and people are feeling good about it, we'll often see that we have increased commitment, morale, and engagement by team members. They want to be a part of this team. They feel valued and appreciated. They like to be part of a high-performing team, and so that diversity can really have that positive benefit as well. Sometimes word gets out, and it also enhances our relationships with clients, vendors, and the public. If our organization is viewed as an organization that welcomes diversity, that encourages it, other people want to align with us. They want to do business with us. They want to have our organization in their community and be a part of their community. So those enhanced relationships are important. And it can really help with recruitment and retention of the best talent. You know, people want to be at high-performing teams. A lot of people want to work in diverse workforces where it's valued and where they can feel appreciated and that their point of view can be welcomed.
Well, Susanna, you know, one of the things that we've found is there are 5 elements that are found in work cultures that welcome diversity. And we're going to talk about those next. The first is that cultures recognize and support individual differences. Keyword there is support, and we'll get into that. These work cultures have clear norms and policies that they have created and they follow. The third element is they create and deliver clear messages and use flexible communication to deal with this diverse workforce, right? And they listen carefully and respond that way. The fourth element is that they provide resources to teams that promote diversity, and so that people can learn to work with diversity effectively. And then finally, management walks the talk. In other words, the leadership itself actually supports the entire culture.
Steve, I have a couple people telling me that they can't see the screen on our control panel. It looks like we're showing the screen. I'm going to stop it and restart it and see if that helps for anyone. So I'm going to stop showing our screen, and then I'm going to start showing the screen again. So I apologize if for some reason you're not able to see this, but hopefully that helped.
Maybe somebody could text or...
Yeah, can anyone message us and let us know to confirm that you can or you cannot see? You can use that chat feature on GoToMeeting.
Down at the bottom, the chat box. Mm-hmm.
Kelly says she can see it. Holly says she was seeing a gray screen, and Rosemary wasn't able to see it. And Christine says she can see it too, so it may be an intermittent issue that we're having, so I apologize for any trouble that you're having.
Okay.
We will have that recording. Hopefully everything's recording up on the website, like I said, within 24 hours. Technology is sometimes our friend, but not always. Last time the phones went out when we did a webinar, so that was great too. Keeps us on our toes, I guess. Okay, so number one, we want to talk about recognizing and supporting individual differences. And this is a really key element, I think, to having a diverse workforce. And number one is creating an environment of respect and positive regard for all people. You know, you want to make sure that you reinforce that it's okay to be different and that as an organization we value different perspectives. You need to, and I think one of the things that's really important is that you need to provide a supportive atmosphere to your team members so they can feel safe coming to you and asking questions, trying to understand. A lot of times working with people who are different than you can be uncomfortable and you don't know exactly what to do. In our Work Opportunities Unlimited division, we work with people with barriers to employment. Sometimes those barriers are a disability. And our career resource specialists who help those individuals often are interfacing with the individual's coworkers. So if John is placed working at Home Depot, we may help John's coworkers understand how do they communicate with this person. For example, I remember learning communicating with a person who had a hearing disability who was using an interpreter. And it's common to look at the interpreter instead of looking at the person when you're communicating. So prompting, how do I talk with someone when they have an interpreter? You know, giving people that information. Interfacing with someone who uses a wheelchair. You know, do I sit down? Do I look at them? Do I stand over them? How do we do that? And so it's really important for people to have that safe space to be able to ask those questions, because I think that our employees want to help people be successful and they want to work with a diverse workforce. They just don't always know how to do it. And sometimes human nature is, if we're not sure and we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, we might avoid it, which actually then puts that person in more of an isolation than having them be included. So you can do that through your communication, through training, just through being a resource for your team members so that you're helping them navigate through those differences. It's really important to make sure that if you see intolerant behavior towards someone, that you're going to address that behavior right away. You know, you don't want to just sweep it under the rug or hope that it gets better, because there's a person on the receiving end of that, and there are other people who are watching that. So it's really important that you use that as a teachable moment, that you're helping that person, that you're providing that kind of coaching. Sometimes it's really just a lack of knowledge, but it may be that you find coaching isn't working, and there may be some other intolerance issues or things that you need to address differently. But you're not going to know that until you have that conversation. We also want to think about, you know, people talking about them and working with them in positive regard. So there are a lot of examples of how you can do this. For example, you know, you may want to get employee Jane involved in a current compliance issue, since you know she has some past work experience that no one else on the team has. So she has some input or perspective that is different than what everyone else has. And so you can do that with, not I'm going to have Jane work with you because she knows more than you, but hey, Jane has great experience in this area. Jane, have you ever had a similar situation? Can you give us your perspective on how this worked or didn't work, or what challenge? We'd love your thoughts and ideas. It's encouraging, trying to get people more involved in the conversation. Supporting individual differences means lots and lots of encouragement for team members. Steve and I will often talk about we use the predictive index, but other kinds of assessments that you might use that talk about communication style, and we know people communicate differently. Some of us don't like to talk until we think we have the right answer. Other people are happy to talk out loud. Sometimes there are cultural differences for how much people want to participate in a conversation. It can be really hard to be the one person in the room that might think differently. So how do we make it so that, again, we have that safe space so people feel they can give that input? You know, it may be for the person that's the factual communicator, it may be prepping them in advance or telling them what we'd like to talk about, and I'd really like you to give this perspective because I think it's going to be helpful. So that prepping of the person. Same thing if you know the person has a different opinion, you know, helping present to the team so the person feels comfortable saying, I don't exactly see it that way, let's talk about that. That's healthy conflict that we've talked about. We want on our team, which leads to better decisions and outcomes. You really do want to make sure that if there's negative behavior that's just going to undo everything that you're trying to do, which sometimes happens on the team, like, oh, Marsha, that's never going to work. We've tried that already. As the facilitator of the meeting or the team leader or whoever it is, we need to make sure that as we're encouraging different perspectives, we also have that support in place to say the naysayers don't get to squash it, or if they start naysaying, we're going to have, you know, that facilitator who can say, gosh, Steve, stop. Let's let Marsha talk about that because I think that's really interesting. So sometimes we're going to encourage good stuff and then people squash it, and so they're never going to volunteer again because they've just been reinforced not to do it, that they're going to get stepped on. We also want to think about some different suggestions that we have here for helping the team benefit from diversity as well as team members. You know, partnering people with complementary skills to work on projects. So again, thinking about personality styles or work habits, you know, people that think big picture, partnering them with people that think more about the details and how things are actually going to work. So having those different learning and work styles together can be really helpful. Now, I'm going to flash ahead to the next slide because, Steve, I know you just did a blog post. Steve doesn't like to talk about his blog posts, but his blog posts are awesome. Steve on leadership. Your recent post was leading 5 generations in the workplace, and I thought that was a really great one to think about diversity and how that affects people's communication and working together.
Yeah, it was fun to put that together. One of the things that I learned from doing that, in fact, Susanna, right before we went in this call, I was on another conference call, and in that conference call, I joked about the 5 generations because there were 5 generations in the conference call, and they were laughing about that. So it's changing the workplace quite a bit to see 5 different generations. In that blog, I posted a little table that you can see if you go right now or at any time to steveonleadership.com. It happens to be the current article up there, so you can see it. But it kind of lays out the 5 generations that are in the workplace, and of course the Gen Z or I generation is just entering the workplace right now. But a lot of matures are working until they until they're 75 or 80 years old, either for income needs or, frankly, social needs. A lot of them, if you talk to them, they like the socialization. They don't like being at home with nothing to do, so they're working to get that social interaction. And this table talks a little bit about the communication differences that they have and their attitudes towards career, and also down at the bottom, the formative life experiences they have. And we have to remember that a lot of our positions in companies and how we work and interact is a function of how we were brought up. You know, if you know somebody like I did that lived through the Great Depression, it's taken them years to get over what that was like. It's very dramatic, right? So we have to be aware of the social times that help form people. And my takeaway in that article that you can, if you choose to read it, were really three. First, as a manager or somebody in the workplace, we really need to ignore generational labels and try to relate to each person. Forget somebody's 70 or 19 and treat them as a person. Well, where are they in the workplace at this point? What are their needs? You want to encourage collaboration among and between people of different generations. And that's true when we talk about other diversity in a moment. The more people work together, you will see that the differences go away. They melt and they disappear. And the third takeaway was to provide a variety of benefits for your teams. People are at different places in their life cycle. So I don't think benefits are necessarily generational as much as they are where people are in their life cycle, and to try to do that. So Susanna, those are just a couple quick thoughts about 5 generations in the workplace.
Great. I know that that's, let's see, Steve, if you can help me go back and I'll do it right here, finish that last slide. I think there were a couple of bullets left. See if I can use my mouse with my left hand.
Doing great, Jim. I'm very proud of you.
A couple other things talking about cultural differences, you know, just remembering that sometimes people respond to feedback differently. So some may not, for some cultures it may feel like a micromanagement style when you're trying to provide direction. So you just want to try to be aware of those kinds of things that may feel degrading. Something we've encountered too is some cultures come to the workplace and they are very respectful of leadership. And so we may be asking for input and they'll say yes, 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 without really giving us their true opinion. And so you're really going to have to work through some of those differences first to recognize them and then to understand, I need to approach this instead of asking Steve a direct question. I need to engage him in a different way to try to get what his real perspective is on that situation. So again, a couple of ideas for training new team members, you know, demonstrate what you want completed and have the person perform it, thinking about those different styles. Sometimes utilizing visual training methods, which may not come naturally to some of us, that it may not be the point that we grew up in that's as natural for us, but trying to incorporate some of those kinds of things. It was interesting yesterday, I was listening to a segment on NPR, and I can't even remember what time it was or what show it was, but they were talking about using gaming in teaching in schools. And, you know, there was a lot of debate about, does this make it so the kids now don't communicate with anybody, or do the games reinforce behavior? But it was a great debate talking about how certain things can be used to reinforce training, give immediate feedback. So doing it a little bit different than us just talking to the person or giving them a handout, but trying to find different ways to help that person learn. All right, let me skip through these. A few more things on recognizing and supporting individual differences. You know, we have a large and diverse workforce in our organization, and we've learned that we need to tailor the way we do things from time to time to support different styles. So, for example, we might need to provide training in a different way, like I was talking about with videos included or different kinds of ways to do it. But sometimes it's recognizing that the training period may look differently. So it may take longer for someone to learn the fundamental computer things because they don't come with that background. And once they get it, they're going to be okay, but they may not fit within our 2-week time frame for something that we were expecting, because that's just that place that they're coming from is a little bit different. Again, in our work opportunities division, we work with people with barriers to employment, and sometimes what we find is that our career resource specialists can help identify a portion of the job that the person can do. We call that in that industry carving out a piece of the job. So they may not be able to do all pieces of the job successfully right now, but there are certain pieces of it that they're going to be really good at. And so as an employer, thinking about, are there ways to do it differently? We've had it this way for the last 32 years. Is there a different way of doing it so someone can be successful with it and add value to the organization? So I think those are important things to think about. When I was thinking about this, job sharing and flex time are also great examples of supporting diversity. We've seen this with our workforce too. We're trying to think about how do we provide a career for people for all those different stages of their life that they go through. And we did a company-wide meeting last week where we talked about a few employees who have come to us and their roles have changed and they have worked in different ways. Some now have a work-from-home job or a part-time job while their kids are growing up. And like Jessica on our recruiting team, she came in part-time work from home, and her role has expanded and developed as her life has changed again as her kids are growing up. So those things can be great ways to bring people into the workforce that have other commitments besides work, where they can still add value to their careers as well as adding to us. A few other things just to remember thinking about the diverse workforce. Recruitment, we may need to think about how do we bring different people into the organization. If you're looking at diversity and thinking about what diversity is that you're looking to add, it may be a cultural center or international institute that you may want to work with. If your organization typically has an older workforce, then you may want to look at working with a college placement service or some other organizations that may recruit a younger workforce. It may be that you want to purposefully try to get people from outside your industry to bring in a fresh perspective. You're going to want to look at what kind of diversity do we want to bring in and who do we work with to do that. And really that's that last bullet, that mixture of similarities and differences within your team collectively to get the best result is really what we're going for. So, Steve, you're going to talk a little bit about setting clear norms and policies.
Yes, let me do that. Guidelines. First of all, as a manager, you need to know that you need to share information with all team members and do it in a respectful and appropriate way. And you need to model that behavior for others. And that's really a key. And this includes guidelines for how you treat one another. And Susanna mentioned that a minute ago about acting quickly when you see behavior. We'll be saying that again later. For example, there shouldn't be any joke telling in the workplace that might offend another person. A lot of times people's jokes, unfortunately, have ethnic connections to them, and there's no place for that in the workplace, and you need to be on top of that. Or how about jokes on the wall? People cut out cartoons and put them up in their workplaces, or other pictures that might offend people. And you as a manager need to be totally aware of that, because what may be offensive to you might not be offensive to someone else, or vice versa. What's not offensive to you might be offensive to somebody else. And you need to realize that you have to take into consideration everybody's situation. Norms can also, in terms of guidelines, help you set up how you do functions inside your organization. Perhaps you have traditional events that you have, like meals and dinners and things. Maybe if you have a cultural diversity in your organization, how could you pull some of cultural foods or a cultural interests into the function itself, and how could you do that? If you have multi-generations, maybe having more family activities where families are bringing in children and parents and such, that can really make it fun as well. The other thing is that you want to make sure you understand the needs of your workforce. And when we say needs, that's a big word, isn't it? The word needs. What are the needs of your workforce? You think you've got everything covered, but each person has a different need. And you might have a bilingual workforce where people have a hard time with English. English is a second language. Maybe they speak Spanish. Have you thought of having some of your signage put in 2 languages? Many businesses do. Suzanne and I go out, we can see multiple languages in the workplace. Right next, there's English and Spanish right below it. If you're not doing that and you start to have some workers that speak Spanish, maybe you want to think about adding that to your workplace. One of our divisions helps people with disabilities find jobs. This year we're going to help place about 1,500 people with disabilities in organizations. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And those folks are wonderful. Well, some of them can't read. So forget bilingual. You can give them instructions on a piece of paper and they can't read. And surprisingly, I'm sure many of you have seen this happen, that's an invisible disability. So you can look at someone and not know they cannot read. And so you want to be aware of that. And then maybe you want to use more visual images to show people what the job tasks are. Quite often we will do that with some of the clients that we serve, but I've also seen it with other people that can't read, where you just have, and frankly, I just put together a piece of equipment at home, and I loved it because the first 5 steps were visual 5 steps, no words. I'm going, hey, this is perfect. I guess maybe I benefit from that too. But just using visual pictures can help the person know what steps that they need to follow. So that's another need that you want to kind of pay attention to and be aware of. You want to look at your policies and your systems to ensure that they, support this diversity. Susanna mentioned performance appraisals. Are your policies flexible enough to include this? Some organizations I've been in, they have a self-evaluation that people have to do. Well, some people don't know how to write, or they write very poorly, or they can't read, or they have trouble reading. So asking them to complete a self-evaluation, you need to be thoughtful about how you approach that. Are your self-evaluations in English, and the person is Spanish speaking? You want to just kind of be aware of that. You want to make sure you're supporting them. It could be that your policies and systems don't include a lot about teamwork. Well, maybe you should start looking at how can we fold teamwork and collaboration into our policies and procedures, because the more teamwork and collaboration that's required, I've got quotation, my finger,
I can see them.
Yeah, finger quotes. But you can kind of set the norms for people working together, and that's a key. Showing cultural sensitivity in the workplace is important. One comment I wanted to make, which is sort of connected to policies and systems as well, is that as a manager, you want to pay attention to cultural differences as it affects supervision. In 2 recent cases that Suzanne and I have been, or I was involved in one, Suzanne involved in the other one, we have different ethnicities involved with supervising workers. And I didn't know this until I got involved with it, but that within, in this particular case, the Hispanic community, the supervisor was of Mexican descent, and the workers were of Puerto Rican descent. And the Puerto Rican workers did not want to have a supervisor from Mexico. And so there was a cultural breakdown that was occurring in this organization that most of us were unfamiliar with. And how do you deal with that, and how do you have people come to the table and talk about it, which was what we were involved in. So you want to be sensitive. The point here is you want to be sensitive to that in your workplace, and don't assume that if you happen to have a lot of Spanish-speaking people, that they all come from the same cultural background. So there's little nuances that we have to be very sensitive to in today's workplace. One of the things that we noted, somebody reminded me of, is that there's a company right here in New Hampshire that employs as much as 20 different ethnicities at their plant, and they have a flag out front. They have flags of all 20 countries that they display, which I think is a wonderful way to show cultural sensitivity as well. You can have I've seen this. One of our clients has a potluck meal every week, and they rotate it based on the cultures of the people working there. So they get to taste different foods from different, parts of the represented by different folks in the organization.
And that doesn't even have to be different countries, because different parts of this country eat very differently.
Absolutely. We have a young man working here from down south, and he introduced us to gator tails. I said, what's a gator tail? So you're right, I learned something about what a gator tail is. I'm still not sure I want it. He said I might like it. And the 5th point is really make sure we're paying attention to flexible work arrangements, which can be helpful. Susanna gave you a couple of examples. We use a lot of people working from home now. I think we're approaching 30 people or more that work out of their houses that perform functions for us, which provides them great flexibility and helps them. But you can also pay attention to the skill sets of the people, and that's why knowing the individuals is important. For example, we have a young man with autism that we've helped place at Walmart in Maine, and he can only work for a couple hours at a time. His attention span runs about 2 hours. However, he is so intelligent, one part of his brain is so intelligent that he can memorize digits, long strings of numbers. And they have him doing all the returns in the cosmetics section. And so they carved out a position, this term is called carve out. They carved out a position where he comes in 3 times a week. They save up all the cosmetic returns in a basket for him. He can go back in that aisle. I've actually observed him. He goes back in that aisle. He look at the number on the, that little barcode, knows exactly where that number is in the rack. I saw him do eyeliner. I didn't know eyeliner pencils, Susanna, were these little tiny little things.
Yes.
He could take a handful of eyeliner pencils, look at the number. He knew which slot it went in because his mind had memorized where all the slots were.
That would be
Think about a strength, right?
Very complicated job
Very
to get those all in the right place.
Absolutely. But that's a flexible, that's a flexible work assignment that fit that particular person's strengths. Well, as we know, the biggest part of
everything,
the biggest element is always in communication, isn't it, Susanna, right? And I think as a manager, you need to always think about asking the right questions, listening carefully, and checking for understanding. All those are things, it's like communication 101. We have another webinar on that topic. But checking for understanding is really important, listening and then checking for understanding. Because you might say something and the person nods at you and you think they get it, but they actually don't. So unless they can say it back to you or communicate in another way, you want to make sure you're checking for understanding. And as the workforce becomes more diverse, this is more important. You can't assume that people, that's clear for everybody. So you want to be aware that there's differences in communication. Let's talk about some of those differences for a minute. The first one is you might have a manager, a supervisor who says, I got an open door policy. Come in anytime. Talk to me. Love to do it. Well, guess what? There are certain cultures that will not go in and ask a question of a superior or somebody in authority. That is something that they will avoid. And so you can say, I have an open door policy, and they'll never come in, and even though there's a problem, because it doesn't work for them. A solution for that might be for you to have a team leader or some other person that's more of a peer, they perceive as a peer person that can talk to them. I even suggest maybe they have their own meeting and you come in as a supervisor for 5 minutes of that meeting, do something not work related so that you can ask each other just personal questions, favorite this, favorite that. And the supervisor then leaves, and then this other team lead asks the more detailed questions to try to build a relationship. But just be aware that open door doesn't work in all cultures. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, which is one of the best books around, if you've never read it, you should read it, tells the story of the Korean Air Flight 801 that crashed into a mountain in Guam in 1997. It killed 223 people. When you read the story as Malcolm wrote it, it's very compelling, because he writes about how a series of misfortunes led to the flight, and they actually have scripts from the black box that gives what was said between the parties in the cockpit. And there was bad weather, of course. There was an offline warning system that didn't work, outdated charts. But the co-pilot was afraid to question the poor judgment of the pilot. The pilot was making a bad decision, and the co-pilot did not want to question him because of the cultural backgrounds that they had. He also went on to explain, Gladwell did, about the 1990 crash of Avica Flight 52 on Long Island. And that's the one where the plane, you may remember, ran out of gas. It was circling over LaGuardia Airport, I think, ran out of fuel and crashed, killing 73 people. It was a Colombian airliner. And they did not assert themselves with the air traffic controllers. And they have the whole script where the air traffic controller would say, how are you doing on fuel? And they actually asked inquiry questions. And at some point when they were literally almost out of fuel, the pilots didn't push back on the air traffic controllers because they in effect, they respected authority. And that's what Gladwell found, is that in some cultures, they just value authority, and they'll just walk right off the end of the dock and die rather than challenge authority. So if you are a manager, or you're in that role, or you're coaching in that role, be aware that that is really very important. You of course want to understand the needs of your workers, which I mentioned before. English is second language and so forth. We talked about that a little bit. We already talked about generational differences. We're noticing that, for example, we've adapted to email. Even the matures are emailing now, so that email as a form of communication has replaced letters, etc. For some, regrettably, but it has changed that. What we're finding in our organization is that the younger millennials and people younger, they don't respond to voicemails. You can call them all you want, but hey, good luck. That voicemail box will fill up sometimes. Not all of them, but many of them. And two, they may not respond to email. They like text messaging, and they like images, visual images. And so knowing how to communicate effectively using images, using video as a teaching mechanism, and texting may be an effective way for us to communicate more effectively. Also, beware of people with hearing impairments. They may, you want to be aware of that. I think Susanna might have mentioned, hearing impairment in the workplace. There was one worker that had a meeting, and they provided, a coworker had some limited sign language, and the person was in the meeting, and the way this person understood was by reading lips, but the person that was speaking to them's back was turned to them, and they couldn't see what the person was saying, and the person that was hard of hearing got very upset about it. So it caused some friction within the organization. So just being sensitive to how people communicate is really very important when you're thinking about that. And avoid jargon. I mean, that's something Suzanne and I have experienced ourselves. Jargon is a funny thing. I remember, I often tell this story. I'm sure he won't mind, but one of our managers was working with a new set of team members in the DC area, and the team members were made up of people from wonderful diversity all over the country, all over the world. And one day I was sitting in a meeting. I saw this face to face. So this is a big person like that. He goes, "Okay," Ryan says, "Okay, it's time to circle the wagons." And everybody nods their head. And I'm looking at this group, and I'm going, do they know what circle the wagons mean? So after another minute, because we have a very relaxed environment working on, I go, do you guys know what circle the wagon means? And they all shook their heads no. They had no idea what it was, yet they had nodded their heads when Ryan said it. And so you want to be aware of the jargon. I've jotted down here 10 idioms that I've heard in the workplace. And please think about being careful how you use these when you're working with folks. But there's a couple of good ones here.
If you pay attention, after we did that example for Ryan, I can't believe, and I know he couldn't believe, how many you use in the course of a day. Yeah,
here's just 10 that we probably all use.
Right.
That people would look at you. I know one of them, a final funny one, was I had read about somebody who was told from a person who speaks English from another country, was asked to just put his John Hancock on the document, mail it back. And then the phone call ended, and the person's like in a panic because he had to do it right away. He wanted to know where he could find John Hancock. And it took a long time and so many calls for somebody to figure out, oh, John Hancock needs your own signature. So yeah, you're right. So Suzanne, let's go on and talk about some resources. We have about 14 minutes left, or 13 minutes left.
Okay, great. So a couple of ideas on how you can target available resources or be a resource to your team. I think first of all, number one, like we talked about support, acknowledge that this isn't necessarily going to be easy. It doesn't matter what your diversity is. Having a lot of people in the room, there's potential for conflict, misunderstanding, things not working so smoothly. So as you're championing diversity in your organization, you're trying to bring different kinds of diversity into the organization. Also let people know it's not going to be perfect, and we're going to work through things. It's going to be okay, and that's that safe space that people can come and ask questions and work through challenging situations that they have. So I think so many times it really is just saying it out loud. It's not going to be all sunshine and roses right now. Recognize successes. We don't often, well, sometimes we fall into this where we correct things, but we don't always recognize what went well. That was great. What did we do, and how do we do more of that? Or how do we, do that so that we have this kind of success again in the future? And then sharing those teachable moments, because people, Steve and I will find we can do a class and we can talk, but it really is till people are in it or experiencing that they're really learning. And so having real examples of things can be very helpful. Obviously being respectful of if there's any sensitivity in the information. Providing information about networking groups might be great for people. So if your team, may want to, they may not realize that there are some networking groups, young professionals, people with disabilities, veterans groups, whatever it may be. There may be some groups that they can network with so that professionally they can make other associations and get other perspectives. That can be helpful. Encourage some team members to form resource groups. If you think about your teams right now, you probably got a lot of diversity. You may have, on today's call, we may have Patriots fans and then Patriots haters. Those could be two different groups in the workplace. We could have people that might like sports, people that might like reading, would want to have a book club, cooking class, learning about different ways to cook, whatever. Those kinds of things, of any kind of those connections that we can help people make so they get out of the groups they hang with and start associating with other people can be really helpful. And I think for you, if you're going to be involved in trying to encourage and support diversity in the workforce, continue to keep learning and sharing. So there are lots of blogs out there, websites you can visit, conferences you can go to. But Steve talked earlier on about walking the talk. We really need to make sure that senior management and management are on board. They're understanding, they're supporting the same kinds of things that we're doing. And you may be the one person that's going to be that key person that gathers information and shares with the team and helps reinforce the right concepts that you want to have in the organization. Sometimes somebody just needs to be the one that takes charge and shares that information. A few other resources that are out there and available for you, there are actually a lot. I just did some Googling yesterday. So if you're a member of the Society for Human Resource Management, they have a whole section about diversity, toolkits, things that you can download, information that you can get, and that's SHRM.org. In New Hampshire, this is a group, diversityworkforce.org. That is a group of employers that are working together to support diversity in the workplace. We have people on from a lot of different states today, but I'm guessing that if you Google this for your state, you'll find some similar organizations. Some of the local human resource chapters have diversity committees that try to make employers aware of resources or events or things that are going on in the workplace as well. A site that we often go to is askjan.org, which is the Job Accommodation Network. And that provides a lot of really great resources if you're working with people with disabilities or other barriers to employment, helping employers, big and small, about ideas of how we might carve out jobs, support someone who has a barrier to employment, finding a different way to do work. It's really, really a great resource. And then I Googled Barnes & Noble yesterday, and if you look, I can't see on the screen, but how many books are there, Steve?
No, there's at least 8 there.
Yeah, but if you look at the one of how many, I don't know, 500 or something. There,
yeah, 510.
510. So on Barnes & Noble, if you go to Amazon, there may be a different number. So lots and lots of resources that are out there. And again, this may be something that, wasn't part of your standard training. So you, who are that person who's bringing this into your organization or supporting it, may need to do some learning on your own and then sharing those really important things with your group. So lots and lots of information that's out there.
Well, thank you, Susanna. So let's talk about management walking the talk. And of course, the first thing is to consistently treat everyone fairly and honestly. And that sometimes takes work on your part, to be always aware of this. Susanna mentioned a minute ago something that triggered something in my mind, and that is when you're dealing with multiple cultures and multiple diversity, you got a diverse workplace, you need to be educated in etiquette. We know etiquette when we go to a restaurant or a store. I mean, you eat with your fork first, all that. That's the type of etiquette. Well, there's a certain type of etiquette that's appropriate with different groups that you're dealing with. So I think that's a suggestion for any of you that are in the HR world. Think about some etiquette lessons that you can use. And you know what? Use your workforce to help you come up with those etiquette lessons because they would know best. For example, something you might not know when you're serving somebody with a disability, if they have a wheelchair, The wheelchair is really an extension of the person. And you might see someone and think they need help with the wheelchair, so you come up behind them to help push them. Your intentions are wonderful, but you should ask permission first. And you would say, could I help you? Would you like some help pushing your wheelchair up the ramp? Something like that. That's what I would refer to as etiquette. So there's common etiquette that you would want to be aware of. You might want to touch somebody who looks like they're disoriented, an older person or a person with a disability, and you want to guide them or offer them your hand. You should ask permission first before you do that. So there's just little pieces of etiquette that I'd recommend that you think about too. Another thing about treating people fairly and respectfully, I was made aware of an example with meetings with managers where they were having a meeting maybe once a week, where they were inviting a select group of people together, and they were going out for lunch, and they were talking about plant issues. It was very productive. They built a strong team doing it. However, they didn't think that it was leaving out people. And so people assumed that they were not as important, and it caused some backlash to them. So they stopped doing these off-site meetings and started to include more people in the on-site meetings. And that helped make everyone feel they were being treated more fairly. It's also very true if you have remote teams. I've seen this happen where you have a supervisor who's on site in one place with a couple of team members around him or her, and 10 remote workers working from their homes or some other place. Those remote workers are disconnected and assume that, probably correct or incorrect, that the people working right around that supervisor get preferential treatment. So it's important, if you have those kind of situations, to be aware of how do you treat people fairly who are not working with you. They're in a different location. And this is a really important point that I want to spend a minute on, and that is your job is to watch for unhealthy diversity friction. In the article I wrote on generations, there's an author out there that refers to the generational friction. That is, young people thinking the old person doesn't know what they're doing, the old person thinking the younger person doesn't know what they're doing. That's called friction. And I think it's really important for you to watch out for that friction. You want to keep your eyes open for your managers and supervisors who may be disrespectful to workers. You want to watch for them. You want to remember that that people's egos can get in the way of how they supervise. I'll be writing about egos next week in my blogs, or this week. It's going to be published this week, so you might tune in for that. Be very aware of people's egos. When you have people that are from when there's friction that's developing from different places, I recommend that you give thought to having them work together on one project with one common goal that supports the company's mission, and have people from diverse backgrounds focus on that and have them articulate what the goal is, and then have them put all their energy into that goal. If you do that, they're not putting energy on themselves and how different they are. They're actually finding commonality around that goal, and that's the trick, how to link them to that goal. I also recommend, you've heard me say this before, write the goal on a whiteboard or a flip chart, because then they will look at the whiteboard, they will look at the flip chart, and they won't look at the differences of the people next to them. So that's another way that you can help reduce that friction. Finally, remember that when everybody reacts negatively to diversity, it's out of fear, always. So you just want to make sure that you're looking at what's causing the fear, and sometimes that fear lies in the ego, of course, but you want to be aware of that when people are pushing back, there's a fear in there, the fear of the unknown or the fear of the different person. It's responsibility of management to set up metrics to measure, and you can do that with attitude surveys. You want to watch your turnover statistics and analyze your workforce. What is the mix and how has it changed? Very important when you look at turnover statistics to be aware of one manager. Does one manager have higher turnover? And maybe there's a certain diverse population that's turning over a lot under that manager. That gives you a symptom that there's more training and more development that is needed for that particular person. Finally, managers need to compare the organization's level of diversity with its goals. Maybe you're large enough where you actually have some diversity goals. If you do, then you want to keep track of those. And you want to make sure that you have promotion equity, which means people from all groups are getting promoted at the same rate. So Suzanne, you want to touch on in a minute? We have 2 minutes we have left on
We
a couple
do.
of action steps.
Yeah, action steps. So it's obviously a really big topic, but here's where we suggest if you're leading today saying, yes, I want to take this on as one of my projects for this year, here are some places to get started. So number one, I think on that last slide, Steve was talking about, you know, we want to make sure management is in support of the initiative. Without that, like in so many things, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So you really want to make sure that everyone's on board first before you start proceeding in this direction. Then the next thing you're going to do, I really think, is assessing where you're at. So Steve talked about some metrics that you might have in place, turnover statistics. You might track some different metrics based on EEO criteria, but you want to think about, too, those other elements of diversity. It may be work style. We looked at that one time to say, we have too many risk-averse people on this team. We need some risk takers to add that different perspective into us as we're making decisions. So it doesn't just have to be all those things that fit the EEO boxes. So assessing where are you at, that could be done through a workforce analysis, through some sort of survey, using a consultant, you know, where are you at with that? If you're a global organization, obviously you have a lot more considerations to be thinking about than if you're a U.S.-based organization. You may also want to do a temperature check with your workforce. Now, some of this you're going to know naturally by the kinds of issues that are bubbling to the surface and to your desk in the workplace. But it may be that you want to talk with team members about what are their concerns, what are they excited about, where do they need support, because that's going to help you as you're assessing what kind of support do you need to provide to them. Then you're going to need to look at, you know, what's the program? What are the things that we're going to put into place? Do I need to provide training to my teams? What am I going to provide so that this can be successful? And then finally, you want to make sure that you're sharing your vision. So what is it that we're doing? You know, I like the little orange guy getting on board with the gray guys there on whatever the white platform is that they're doing, but getting everyone on board, letting them know, here's what we're doing, this is why it's important to us, these are the resources that we're going to dedicate, here's how we're here to help, and this is why we think this is a good thing. And sometimes we have our great ideas, but we don't let people in on it, and there are a lot of people who want to be a part of this. Kelly gave us a suggestion. She says that she was recommended to read a book that says, let's see if I can read it, Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. She says it was recommended to her by a friend, and it talks about business etiquette with different cultures. So that's great. Thank you for that, Kelly. So it says Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. Thank you. We're really short on time today, so I'm going to go ahead and move past the question section, and I want to get you that number. But before I do, again, I just encourage you to visit Steve on Leadership. Steve has this great way of taking a very complicated topic and putting it into a one-pager, we always say, but in the technical world, a short blog post that really communicates the information, and we'd love to have you join us. You can subscribe or just go on and visit. So here is the number today if you're tracking those HRCI credits. It's 233-306, and the title is Strategies to Support a Diverse Workforce. Again, it's 233-306. I'll say that one more time before the end. We are taking a little summer break here, so our next webinar is going to be in September, and we're going to have a couple of attorneys join us, Naomi Butterfield and Kai McGinty from Bernstein Schurer in Portland, Maine. Fran Lefevre is going to be with us as well to talk about conducting effective internal investigations. So we're going to have that attorney perspective as well as the human resource practitioner perspective, which I think will be great. And then Fran is back in October with Charles Giacopelli, who is a workers' compensation attorney, and they're going to talk with us about preparing for a workers' compensation hearing. Fran's got a lot of great experience, again, as the HR practitioner, and Charles, the attorney that we work with, that can give you some really great tips that are going to help you manage these kinds of situations. This class is being recorded. We are going to have this up on our website. So instead of saying register now, it'll say listen now. And I'm going to anticipate by the end of the week, you're going to see that up on the website. Again, here's that number if you're looking for it, 233-306, Strategies to Support a Diverse Workforce. Thank you so much for your time and interest today. We're glad you joined us, and we hope to see you in September. Have a nice summer.